The phone rang at 2:17 in the morning. Lily knew because she looked at the clock when she reached for it, her hand fumbling across the nightstand in the dark. But before her fingers touched it, the ringing stopped. She lay there for a moment, heart pounding in that particular way it does when you're pulled from deep sleep, waiting to see if it would ring again. The silence stretched, heavy, unnatural. Then Daniel's phone lit up on his side of the bed. Not the sleek iPhone he carried everywhere, the one Lily knew the passcode to. Different phone. One she'd never seen before. The screen glowed in the darkness, and she saw the message. The shipment is compromised. Tell the boss he's not safe. They're already moving. Lily stared at those words, reading them twice, 3 times. Her brain trying to make sense of them in the context of the life she thought she was living. Shipment. They're already moving. Words that belonged in a crime thriller. Not in her bedroom at 2 in the morning. The bathroom door opened. Daniel walked out, steam following him, water still dripping from his dark hair. He was only half dressed, and when he saw Lily sitting up in bed, staring at the glowing phone, something flickered across his face. Fear maybe. Or recognition. Or guilt. Something that made her stomach clench with sudden, inexplicable dread. But then it was gone. Replaced by his usual easy smile. The one that had made her fall in love with him 18 months ago when they'd met at a charity gala, and he'd looked at her like she was the only person in the room. "Wrong number?" he asked, his voice casual, almost amused. He crossed to the bed and picked up the phone. Lily watched his jaw tighten, just for a fraction of a second, before he laughed it off. "Spam call. You know how it is." But his hands were shaking. Just slightly. Barely noticeable in the dim light. But Lily noticed. She always noticed the small things about Daniel because she loved him, because she'd memorized everything about him during their 9 months of marriage. "That didn't look like spam," Lily said quietly. "That looked like someone warning you about something dangerous." Daniel set the phone down face first on the nightstand and slid back into bed beside her. His arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her close. "It's nothing, sweetheart. Just someone who got the wrong number. Go back to sleep." His voice was gentle, reassuring. The voice of the man she'd married. But Lily couldn't sleep. She lay there in the darkness long after Daniel's breathing had evened out, staring at the ceiling, replaying that flicker of fear in his eyes, the tremor in his hands, the words on that screen. And for the first time since they'd gotten married, she wondered if she really knew the man sleeping beside her. They had met at a charity gala. That's what Lily told people when they asked how she and Daniel had found each other. It sounded romantic, appropriate, the kind of meet-cute that fit the life they appeared to be building together. The truth was more complicated, though she didn't know that then. Lily had been there because her graphic design firm had donated services to the non-profit hosting the event. A children's literacy organization, something wholesome and worthy. She'd worn her best dress, the black one she kept for occasions where she needed to look more sophisticated than she felt, and she'd gone alone because her boyfriend at the time had broken up with her 2 weeks earlier and she was still pretending she was fine about it. She'd been standing near the bar, nursing a glass of wine she couldn't really afford if she'd had to pay for it herself, watching the crowd of beautiful wealthy people who seemed to move through the world with a confidence she'd never quite managed. And that's when she'd seen him. Daniel had been standing by himself near the windows, looking out at the city lights rather than at the party. He wore his tuxedo like it was a second skin, comfortable and natural, but his posture suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. Lily had liked that about him immediately, that he looked as out of place as she felt, even though he clearly belonged in a way she didn't. She didn't know what made her walk over to him. Boldness brought on by wine, maybe, or loneliness masquerading as courage. But she did. Not a fan of parties, she'd asked. He'd turned to look at her, and she'd seen his eyes for the first time. Dark, intelligent, with a sadness in them that seemed at odds with the elegant setting. "Not particularly," he'd said. "But I keep getting invited, so I keep showing up. You could stop saying yes." "I could," he'd agreed. "But then I'd never meet women brave enough to talk to strangers at parties where everyone already knows everyone." He'd smiled when he said it, and Lily had felt something shift in her chest. Not the butterflies of instant attraction, but something quieter. Recognition, maybe. Like seeing something familiar in a stranger's face. They talked for 2 hours. About art and books and the city and everything except what they did for a living. He'd never mentioned money or business or anything that would have suggested the life he was hiding. And Lily had never asked because she'd been enjoying the conversation too much to risk changing its direction. When the party ended, he'd asked for her number. She'd given it to him, expecting nothing. Men like that, beautiful, sophisticated, clearly wealthy, didn't call women like her. Women with student loans and rent-controlled apartments and careers that were respectable but unremarkable. But he did call. The next day. And the day after that. They'd had their first date at a small Italian restaurant in Lily's neighborhood. Not his. He'd insisted on coming to her. Said he liked exploring parts of the city he didn't know well. She'd thought it was charming. Thoughtful. Now she wondered if he'd been establishing a pattern of keeping her away from his real life. They'd dated for 6 months before he proposed. 6 months of dinners and museums and long walks through the city. 6 months of him being attentive and kind and private in a way she'd mistaken for depth rather than secrecy. He'd told her he worked in finance. Something vague about investments and consulting. When she'd asked for details, he'd deflected smoothly, turning the conversation back to her work, to her dreams. She'd thought he was just more interested in her than in talking about himself. She'd thought a lot of things that turned out to be wrong. The proposal had happened on a quiet Sunday morning in Lily's apartment. No grand gesture, no restaurant or public display. Just Daniel and Lily and coffee and the newspaper spread across her small kitchen table. "I want to spend the rest of my life with you," he'd said, setting down his coffee cup and looking at her with those dark, serious eyes. "Will you marry me?" The ring had been simple, beautiful but understated. Exactly what she would have chosen for herself if she'd been shopping. She'd said yes because she loved him. Because he made her feel safe and seen and chosen in a way she'd never experienced before. Because when she looked at him, she saw a future she wanted to build. They'd gotten married 3 months later at City Hall. Just the 2 of them and 2 witnesses they'd pulled in from the hallway. Daniel had said he wanted it to be just about them, no fuss, no families complicating things. She'd thought it was romantic, intimate. Now she knew he'd been protecting secrets she couldn't have imagined. The first few months of marriage had been exactly what she'd hoped for. Quiet mornings and shared routines and the gentle comfort of building a life with someone. Daniel traveled sometimes for work, but he always came back with stories and small gifts and that smile that made her forget to ask too many questions. They'd moved into a beautiful brownstone apartment in a neighborhood Lily had only ever walked through, never imagined living in. When she'd asked how they could afford it, Daniel had said he'd been saving for years, that his investments had done well, that he wanted to give her a home she'd be proud of. She'd believed him because she wanted to. Because love makes you generous with your doubts. But now, lying awake at 2 in the morning with those words echoing in her head, "The shipment is compromised. Tell the boss he's not safe." Lily started remembering all the small moments she'd smoothed over, all the inconsistencies she'd explained away. The business trips with no company name attached. When she'd asked once what firm he worked for, Daniel had smiled and said, "I'm independent," in a tone that suggested the conversation was over. The driver who picked him up sometimes. A man who stood too rigid, too alert, scanning the street before opening the car door like he was expecting trouble. She'd noticed the way his jacket hung heavy on one side, like he was carrying something beneath it. The watch Daniel wore on special occasions. Expensive. More expensive than anything she could imagine owning. He'd said a friend gave it to him, and she'd accepted that because she didn't want to be the kind of wife who interrogated her husband about gifts. The envelope she'd found once in his jacket pocket, stuffed with crisp $100 bills. More cash than anyone normally carried. When she'd asked about it, Daniel had laughed and said he'd withdrawn it for a poker game with college friends. She'd teased him about being a secret gambler, and he'd kissed her and changed the subject. All these moments, All these red flags she'd collected and dismissed, one after another, because she was in love and she trusted him and she believed their marriage was exactly what it appeared to be. But that message had changed everything. That message and the fear in Daniel's eyes had opened a door in her mind she couldn't close. A voice that kept whispering the same question over and over. Who had she married? Lily started paying attention. Not in an obvious way. She didn't confront Daniel or demand answers. She just watched, listened, noticed things she'd been too comfortable to see before. Over the next few days, she observed how Daniel tensed whenever his phone rang. How he always took certain calls in another room with the door closed. His voice too low for her to hear even when she tried to listen. She noticed how he checked the windows before bed. Not casually glancing out, but actually scanning the street, looking for something specific. When she'd asked him about it once, he'd said he was just making sure everything was locked, but his eyes had that careful, guarded look that meant he was choosing his words too precisely. Lily started asking casual questions over breakfast. Testing. How was your meeting yesterday? What company was it with again? Just a potential client. Nothing interesting. Where was it? Maybe I know the building. Downtown. The usual places. Every answer was smooth, practiced, giving her nothing she could grab onto or follow up on. She'd always thought Daniel was private. Now she realized he was evasive. There was a difference, and once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. Wednesday afternoon, Lily came home early. A client meeting had been cancelled, and instead of staying at her office, she'd decided to work from home. Daniel was supposed to be at his office too, wherever that actually was. She'd been looking for a book she'd lent Daniel weeks ago, something she wanted to reread. She went into his study to search for it. The study was Daniel's private space, the one room in their beautiful brownstone apartment that he'd asked her not to reorganize or decorate. She'd respected that boundary because everyone needed their own space. But now, searching for her book, she found herself really looking at the room for the first time. The bookshelf was filled with volumes on business strategy, classic literature, some travel guides. Normal enough. But when Lily reached for a book on the top shelf, her hand knocked against something that shifted behind the row of books. Something that shouldn't have been there. She pulled the books forward and found a phone. Not Daniel's iPhone, not the mysterious second phone from the other night, but a third phone she'd never seen before. This one was sleek and black, and when she pressed the power button, it lit up immediately. No password. No security at all. Lily's hands shook as she scrolled through the messages. There were dozens of them, all from different numbers, all addressing Daniel as Sir or Boss. Her heart pounded as she read. The shipment from Jakarta cleared customs. Awaiting your orders, sir. Boss, the meeting with the Koreans is set for Friday. They're requesting your presence. Sir, the new security detail is in place. No one gets through without clearance. Lily felt like the floor was tilting beneath her feet. Shipments. Meetings with international contacts. Security details. This wasn't the language of a legitimate businessman. This was something else entirely. Something darker and more dangerous than anything she'd imagined. She put the phone back exactly where she'd found it and left the study on shaking legs. She made it to the kitchen before her knees gave out, and she sank into a chair, pressing her hands to her face and trying to breathe through the panic rising in her chest. Who had she married? What had she gotten herself into? That night, Lily couldn't eat dinner. She pushed food around her plate while Daniel talked about his day. His voice calm and normal, like he wasn't living some kind of double life that involved shipments and security details and people calling him boss. She watched him across the table and wondered how she'd never seen it before. The careful control in the way he spoke, the way he measured every word like he was always performing for an audience. Are you feeling okay? Daniel asked, setting down his fork and studying her with concern. You barely touched your food. I'm fine, Lily lied. Just tired. Daniel reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles in that gentle way that always made her feel safe. You've seemed distant the last few days. Is something bothering you? The concern in his voice sounded genuine, and for a moment Lily almost believed she was imagining everything. Almost convinced herself that there was a reasonable explanation for the phones and the messages and the cash and all of it. But then she remembered the fear in his eyes when that first message had come through, and she knew. She knew something was very wrong. "I'm just stressed about work," she said, pulling her hand away and standing up. "I think I'll take a bath and go to bed early." She left Daniel sitting at the table and went upstairs, her mind racing. She needed more information. She needed proof. And most of all, she needed to know if she was in danger. The next morning, while Daniel was in the shower, Lily did something she'd never done before. She went through his wallet. Her hands trembled as she opened it, feeling like she was violating his privacy even though he was the one keeping secrets. Inside she found his driver's license, several credit cards, a photo of the two of them from their wedding day. And behind the photo, tucked into a hidden slot she almost missed, a business card. Simple black cardstock with silver lettering. No company name, just a phone number and a single word. Tinctum. Lily stared at the card, her mind racing. Tinctum. What did that mean? Was it a company? A code name? She pulled out her phone and typed the word into a search engine, but nothing relevant came up. Just definitions and unrelated businesses. She took a photo of the business card and put everything back exactly as she'd found it. When Daniel emerged from the bathroom, she was sitting on the bed pretending to scroll through social media. Her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Over the next week, Lily became someone she didn't recognize. She checked Daniel's banking app when he left his phone unattended, and what she found made her stomach drop. Their joint checking account had the normal balance she expected, enough for their monthly expenses and some savings. But when she clicked through to view all accounts, she saw something else. A shared account she'd never known existed. And the balance made her head spin. Millions. Not hundreds of thousands, not a comfortable nest egg, but actual millions of dollars moving in and out in transactions that made no sense. Wire transfers from overseas accounts. Deposits that happened at odd hours. Money that appeared and disappeared like water flowing through pipes she couldn't see. Lily sat in their bedroom staring at the screen, trying to process what she was seeing. Where was this money coming from? What was Daniel involved in? And why had he kept this entire financial life hidden from her? She closed the app quickly when she heard his footsteps on the stairs, but her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped the phone. Daniel walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee, one for each of them, and smiled at her like nothing was wrong, like he wasn't hiding millions of dollars and multiple phones and a life she knew nothing about. "Morning, beautiful," he said, handing her a cup. "I was thinking we could have dinner out tonight. There's a new Italian place that got great reviews." Lily forced herself to smile back. That sounds nice. But nothing felt nice anymore. Everything felt like a lie, like she was living in a house of cards that could collapse at any moment. The breaking point came the following Tuesday. Daniel had told her he was attending a business conference at a hotel downtown, something about emerging markets in Asia, and Lily had nodded and kissed him goodbye like she believed him. But then curiosity and desperation had driven her to do something she'd never thought she'd do. She followed him. She waited 20 minutes after he left, then called an Uber and gave the driver the name of the hotel Daniel had mentioned. Her heart was pounding the entire drive, guilt and fear warring in her chest. What was she doing? If Daniel was innocent, if there was some reasonable explanation for everything, then she was about to destroy the trust in their marriage. But if he wasn't innocent, if he was really involved in something dangerous, then she needed to know. The hotel was expensive and elegant, exactly the kind of place where a business conference might be held. Lily walked into the lobby trying to look like she belonged there, scanning the directory for conference rooms. And that's when she saw him. Daniel was standing near the elevators, dressed in an impeccable suit, talking to 3 men Lily had never seen before. One of them was older, gray-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than her car. The other 2 were younger, harder, with the kind of alert posture she'd seen in Daniel's driver. Security, or something worse. Lily ducked behind a column, her heart racing, and watched as the 4 men stepped into a private elevator, the kind that required a keycard to access. But just before the doors closed, something happened that made Lily's blood run cold. The gray-haired man said something to Daniel, and one of the younger men lowered his head in a gesture of clear deference and said, his voice carrying across the lobby, "Forgive me, boss." They'd called him boss. Not Mr. Chen, not Daniel, but boss, like he was someone who commanded respect and fear in equal measure. Daniel's face had changed in that moment. The warm, gentle husband Lily knew had disappeared, replaced by someone cold and commanding, someone who looked at the younger man with an expression that made even Lily shiver from across the lobby. He'd said something sharp and low that she couldn't hear, and the man had nodded quickly, his face pale. Then the elevator doors had closed, and they were gone. Lily stood behind the column for a long time, trying to process what she'd just seen. The way those men had treated Daniel, the respect bordering on fear, the use of the word boss, like it was a title he'd earned through something more than just business success. She left the hotel in a daze and took an Uber home, her mind spinning with possibilities she didn't want to consider. When Daniel came home that evening, she was sitting in the living room pretending to watch television, and when he kissed her cheek and asked about her day, she lied and said it had been quiet. But that night, after Daniel fell asleep, Lily made a decision. She needed answers, real answers, and she wasn't going to get them by waiting for her husband to tell her the truth. She was going to have to find it herself. The next evening, Daniel said he had to go out for a meeting. Something urgent that had come up, he said, apologizing as he grabbed his jacket and his keys. Lily watched him leave, waited 15 minutes, then called her friend Rachel and borrowed her car. She'd thought about this moment all day, planned it carefully, and now she was committed. She followed Daniel's car at a distance, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. He drove out of their neighborhood, through downtown, into an industrial area Lily had never been to before. The kind of area where buildings were spread far apart and streetlights were few and security cameras even fewer. Daniel pulled into what looked like an abandoned warehouse, though Lily could see lights on inside and several expensive cars parked around it. She parked a block away and watched as her husband got out of his car and walked toward the building. And that's when Lily saw them. Armed men. Not police, not security guards, but men carrying weapons openly as they flanked the entrance to the warehouse. They nodded at Daniel as he approached, and one of them opened the door for him with the kind of deference she'd seen at the hotel. Daniel stepped inside, and the door closed behind him, and Lily sat in Rachel's borrowed car with tears streaming down her face and her entire world crumbling around her. Her husband wasn't a businessman. He wasn't an investor or an entrepreneur or any of the things he'd claimed to be. He was something else, something dangerous, something that involved armed men and secret meetings and millions of dollars in hidden accounts. And Lily had no idea what to do about it. She drove home in a fog, her mind replaying everything she'd seen, everything she'd discovered. When Daniel came home 2 hours later, she was sitting in bed pretending to read, and when he undressed and climbed in beside her, she turned off the light without saying a word. But sleep didn't come. Lily lay awake in the darkness, listening to her husband breathe, and wondered how she'd gotten here. How she'd married a man whose real life was a complete mystery to her. And what it would cost her to find out the truth. The next day, while Daniel was supposedly at work, Lily went back to his study. She'd been thinking about that hidden phone, about the messages, and she needed to see them again. Needed to understand what she was dealing with. But when she pulled the books aside, the phone was gone. In its place was a small note, handwritten in Daniel's elegant script. "We need to talk. Tonight." Lily's hands shook as she held the note. He knew. Somehow he knew she'd been snooping, and now there was nowhere left to hide. That evening, Lily sat at the dining table waiting for Daniel to come home, her stomach twisted in knots. When she heard his key in the lock, she stood up, her entire body tense, not knowing what to expect. Daniel walked in, and the moment she saw his face, she knew this conversation was going to change everything. He looked tired, older somehow, like he'd been carrying a weight for a long time and was finally ready to set it down. "Sit down," he said quietly, and Lily sat, her heart pounding. Daniel poured them both a drink, scotch from the expensive bottle they kept for special occasions, and set one glass in front of her. Then he sat down across the table and looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. "I need to tell you something," he said. "And after I do, you're going to have a choice to make about whether you want to stay in this marriage." Lily's throat was too tight to speak, so she just nodded. Daniel took a long drink, then set down his glass and began to talk. "My real name isn't Daniel Chen. It's Daniel Zhao. And I wasn't born into the kind of family I told you I was. I was born into a criminal dynasty." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and terrible. Lily felt like she couldn't breathe. "My father," Daniel continued, his voice steady but quiet, "built an empire. Not a business empire but an underground one. Smuggling, money laundering, protection rackets. Everything you've seen in movies, but worse because it's real and it's ruthless and it's been going on for 3 generations. Lily finally found her voice. "You're a criminal." "I was born into it," Daniel said, and there was pain in his eyes now, raw and genuine. "I didn't have a choice about that. But I did have a choice about what I did with it. And for the last 5 years, I've been systematically dismantling everything my father built." Lily stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "What do you mean, dismantling?" "I mean I've been shutting down operations, selling off assets to legitimate buyers, relocating people who wanted out of the life, and using my position as heir to slowly, carefully, take apart an organization that's hurt thousands of people over the decades," Daniel said. "The money you saw in those accounts, that's money I'm cleaning and redistributing. The meetings I attend, those are negotiations with people trying to get out, or rival groups trying to take over territories I'm deliberately leaving vacant." Lily's head was spinning. "Why didn't you tell me any of this before we got married?" "Because I wanted you to have a normal life," Daniel said, his voice breaking slightly. "Because I fell in love with you and I wanted to be the man you thought I was, not the man I was born to be. I thought I could keep these 2 worlds separate. I thought I could protect you from all of it." "But you can't," Lily said, and it wasn't a question. Daniel shook his head. "No, can't. Because my enemies have figured out that you're my weakness. Your photo is already circulating among people who want to hurt me. And the only way I can keep you safe now is to tell you the truth and let you decide if you want to stay." Lily stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. She walked to the window and stared out at the street, her mind racing. Everything Daniel had told her was insane, impossible, like something out of a thriller novel. But it also made a terrible kind of sense. All the pieces she'd been collecting over the past weeks suddenly fit together into a picture she'd never wanted to see. "Are you in danger?" she asked without turning around. "Yes," Daniel said simply. "Every day." "Am I in danger?" There was a long pause. Then, "Yes." Lily closed her eyes. "What happens now?" "That depends on you," Daniel said. "If you want to leave, I'll arrange protection for you. I'll make sure you're safe, that you can start over somewhere far from all of this. If you want to stay, then we stay together, but you need to understand what that means. It means living with security, being careful about where you go and who you talk to. It means accepting that the man you married has a past he can't escape and enemies who won't stop until he's dead." Lily turned to face him, and she saw the fear in his eyes, the vulnerability he usually kept so carefully hidden. This was the real Daniel, she realized. Not the smooth businessman or the charming husband, but this man standing before her, torn between 2 worlds and trying desperately to do the right thing. "I need time," Lily said. "I need time to think about all of this." Daniel nodded. "Take all the time you need." But time was something they didn't have. 3 days later, everything fell apart. Lily was driving home from the grocery store, her mind still spinning with everything Daniel had told her, trying to figure out what she wanted, what she could live with, what love was worth when it came with danger and secrets and a past that wouldn't let go. She didn't notice the van following her until it was too late. She didn't see the men until they were already moving, their faces covered, their movements practiced and efficient. One moment she was pulling into a parking spot near her building, And the next moment someone had yanked open her car door and a hand was covering her mouth and her vision was going dark. When Lily woke up, she was tied to a chair in what looked like an abandoned building. Her head pounding and her wrists burning from the zip ties cutting into her skin. She tried to scream, but there was tape over her mouth, and all that came out was a muffled sound that echoed uselessly in the empty space. A man walked into her line of sight. He was older, maybe 60, with gray hair and cold eyes and a suit that looked expensive but somehow wrong on him, like he was playing dress-up in someone else's clothes. "Mrs. Zhao," he said, and Lily's blood ran cold at hearing Daniel's real name. "I apologize for the inconvenience, but your husband has been very difficult to negotiate with. He's been dismantling operations that don't belong to him, interfering with business relationships that predate his birth, and generally making himself a nuisance to people who don't appreciate being inconvenienced." The man pulled up a chair and sat down in front of Lily, studying her with those cold eyes. "So we've decided to remind him that there are consequences for his actions. And you, my dear, are that consequence." Lily tried to speak through the tape, tried to tell him that she didn't know anything, that she was nobody important, but the man just smiled. "Oh, we know you're important," he said. "We know you're the only thing Daniel Zhao actually cares about besides his misguided crusade to destroy his father's legacy. So here's what's going to happen. We're going to call your husband and tell him that if he wants you back alive, he needs to stop interfering with our business. He needs to step down, step back, and let the adults handle things the way they've always been handled." The man stood up and pulled out a phone. "And if he refuses, well, then you become an object lesson about why it's a bad idea to marry into our world without understanding the rules." Lily's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might explode. She pulled against the zip ties, but they didn't budge. She tried to scream again, but the tape muffled everything. The man made the call, and Lily could hear Daniel's voice on the other end, tight with panic and rage. She couldn't make out the words, but she could hear the emotion in his tone, the desperation. The man smiled as he talked, his voice casual, like he was negotiating a business deal instead of her life. "You have 12 hours, he said finally. 12 hours to announce your retirement from the family business. 12 hours to transfer back all the assets you've stolen. 12 hours to prove you understand the cost of defiance." He hung up and looked at Lily with those cold eyes. "Now we wait." But they didn't have to wait long. 4 hours later everything exploded. Lily heard the commotion first, shouting and gunfire that echoed through the building like thunder. The man who'd been guarding her rushed out of the room, his weapon drawn, and suddenly Lily was alone, still tied to the chair, her heart racing with terror and hope. More gunfire. Shouting. The sound of bodies hitting the floor. And then footsteps, running, coming closer. The door burst open, and Daniel was there. His face a mask of fury and fear, blood on his shirt and a gun in his hand. He looked at her, and something broke in his expression, something that had been holding him together, and he crossed the room in 3 strides and started cutting through her restraints. "I'm sorry," he kept saying as he freed her, his hands shaking. "I'm so sorry, I should have protected you better, I should have." Lily ripped off the tape and threw her arms around him, holding him so tightly she could feel his heart pounding against her chest. "I'm okay," she whispered. "I'm okay." But she wasn't okay. Neither of them were. Because this was the reality of Daniel's world, the danger he'd been trying to protect her from, and now she'd lived it firsthand. Daniel pulled back and looked at her, his eyes searching her face. "We need to leave. My team has secured the building, but there might be more of them coming." He helped her stand, and they ran through the building together, Daniel keeping one arm around her and his gun raised with the other. They passed bodies, men in suits who weren't moving, and Lily tried not to look, tried not to think about the violence Daniel had used to reach her. They made it outside where 3 black SUVs were waiting, engines running. Daniel practically carried her to the middle vehicle and pushed her inside, climbing in after her and pulling her close. The convoy took off immediately, tires screeching, and Lily buried her face in Daniel's chest and tried to breathe. It's over, Daniel said, his voice rough. They're done. The man who took you was the last real threat, and he's not going to hurt anyone else. Lily didn't ask what that meant. She didn't want to know. They drove for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, and eventually the convoy pulled into the underground garage of a building Lily didn't recognize. Daniel helped her out of the car and up an elevator to a penthouse apartment that looked like something out of a magazine, all glass and steel and expensive furniture. It's one of my safe houses, Daniel explained. We'll stay here until I'm sure there are no other threats. Lily walked to the window and looked out at the city lights, her body aching and her mind numb. Behind her, she heard Daniel making calls. His voice clipped and efficient as he talked to people about cleanup and security and contingency plans. When he finally hung up, he came to stand beside her, and they stood there in silence for a long time. I'm sorry, Daniel said finally. For all of it. For not being honest from the beginning. For putting you in danger. For... Stop, Lily interrupted. She turned to face him, and she saw the guilt and fear and love all tangled together in his eyes. I'm not leaving you. Daniel's breath caught. Lily. I'm not leaving, she repeated firmly. But if we're going to do this, if we're going to stay married and survive whatever comes next, then we do it together. No more secrets. No more trying to protect me by keeping me in the dark. You let me into your world, all of it, or I walk away. That's the deal. Daniel stared at her for a long moment, and then he pulled her into his arms and held her like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to the earth. Okay, he whispered against her hair. Okay. They stood there holding each other as the city lights glittered below them, and the reality of their new life settled around them like a weight they'd have to learn to carry together. Over the next few days, Daniel kept his promise. He showed Lily everything, explained everything, introduced her to the people who worked for him in his mission to dismantle his father's organization. She met the security team, the financial advisors, the former criminals trying to build new lives. She saw the spreadsheets tracking legitimate businesses they were building to replace the illegal ones. She learned the names of the enemies still out there, the territories still contested, the battles still being fought. It was overwhelming and terrifying and nothing like the life she'd imagined when she'd married Daniel 9 months ago. But it was real. And more importantly, it was theirs. They moved to a new apartment, one with better security and a team that swept for surveillance every day. Lily learned to notice when she was being followed, learned the routes that were safe and the ones that weren't. She learned to live with the constant low-level fear that came from knowing that people wanted to hurt the man she loved. But she also learned that love could survive in the cracks between danger, that it could grow stronger when tested by fire. She and Daniel talked more than they ever had before, really talked, about his childhood and his father's expectations and his guilt over the things he'd done before he decided to walk away. And Lily talked about her fears and her anger and her choice to stay despite everything. One night, 3 weeks after the kidnapping, they were sitting on their new balcony drinking wine and watching the sunset when Daniel said, "I need to tell you something." Lily's stomach clenched, but she forced herself to stay calm. "What is it?" "The organization isn't completely dismantled," Daniel said carefully. "There are still people loyal to my father's vision, people who want to rebuild what I've been tearing down. And they're not going to stop trying just because we escaped this time." "I know," Lily said. "Which means we're still targets," Daniel continued. "Both of us. For as long as we're together, you're going to be in danger." Lily set down her wine glass and took Daniel's hand. "I didn't marry your name or your money or your perfectly crafted cover story," she said firmly. "I married you. The real you, messy and complicated and trying to do the right thing despite impossible odds. And if being with you means living with danger, then that's what I choose. Because the alternative is living without you, and I'm not willing to do that." Daniel's eyes were bright with emotion. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not," Lily said with a small smile. "But you're stuck with me anyway." They sat there as the sun set, hands linked, facing an uncertain future together. And for the first time since that phone call had woken her at 2 in the morning all those weeks ago, Lily felt like she could breathe. Because she finally knew the truth. And the truth, as terrifying as it was something she could work with. But the peace didn't last. A week later, Lily was meeting her friend Rachel for coffee. They'd been friends since college, and Rachel had been asking questions about why Lily had suddenly moved apartments and seemed so jumpy all the time. Lily had been deflecting, making excuses about work stress and wanting a change of scenery, but she could tell Rachel didn't believe her. They were sitting in a small cafe near Lily's new apartment when Rachel said something that made Lily's blood run cold. "I need to tell you something," Rachel said, her voice quiet and serious. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." Lily set down her coffee cup, her heart suddenly racing. "What is it?" Rachel took a deep breath. "The night you met Daniel at that charity gala. It wasn't random. I'm the one who suggested you attend that event. And I'm the one who made sure you'd be standing near the bar at exactly the right time." Lily stared at her friend, trying to process what she was hearing. "What are you talking about?" "I work for Daniel's organization," Rachel said, and her voice was shaking now. "Not in the criminal side, but in the legitimate businesses he's been building. He approached me 2 years ago, offered me a job managing one of his real estate portfolios. And 6 months before you met him, he asked me if I knew anyone who might be compatible with him. Someone genuine, someone outside his world." Lily felt like she'd been punched in the chest. "You set us up. Our entire relationship was arranged." "No," Rachel said quickly. "He didn't ask me to set you up. He just asked if I knew anyone. And I thought of you because I knew you'd been going through a rough time after your breakup, and I thought it might be good for you to meet someone new. I mentioned you were attending that gala, and Daniel said he might stop by. But what happened after that, the conversation, the connection, all of that was real. I didn't orchestrate it. I just created the opportunity." Lily stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She felt like the room was spinning, like everything she'd believed about her relationship with Daniel was crumbling all over again. "Did he pay you?" Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "To introduce us?" Rachel's face crumpled. "He made a donation to my company. Large one. But Lily, I swear I didn't do it for the money. I did it because I genuinely thought you two would be good for each other. And you are. Anyone can see that." Lily grabbed her purse and walked out of the cafe without another word. She could hear Rachel calling after her, but she didn't stop. She just kept walking, her mind reeling, until she found herself standing in front of her new apartment building. Daniel was waiting for her inside, sitting on the couch with his laptop, working from home that day. He looked up when she walked in, and the moment he saw her face, he closed the laptop and stood up. "What happened?" he asked. "Rachel told me," Lily said, her voice hollow. "About how we met. About how you asked her if she knew anyone. About the donation." Daniel's face went pale. "Lily, I can explain. Did you pay my best friend to introduce us?" Lily interrupted, her voice rising. "Was our entire relationship based on a transaction?" "No," Daniel said firmly, crossing the room to her. "I asked Rachel if she knew anyone because I was trying to build a normal life outside my father's organization. I was lonely, and I wanted to meet someone who didn't know anything about my past. When she mentioned you were attending that gala, I went hoping I might meet you. But what happened after that, what happened between us, that was real. I fell in love with you because of who you are, not because of some arrangement." "But you lied," Lily said, tears streaming down her face now. "You lied about how we met. You lied about your name, your work, your entire life. And now I find out that even our first meeting wasn't what I thought it was. How am I supposed to trust anything about us?" Daniel reached for her, but Lily stepped back. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I know I've made mistakes. I know I've lied to protect you, to protect myself, to protect what we had. But my feelings for you have never been a lie. The life we've built together, the love we share, that's real. That's the only thing that's ever been completely real in my entire life." Lily wiped at her tears, trying to breathe, trying to think. "I need space," she said finally. "I need time to figure out if I can live with all of this. The danger I can handle. The secrets I can work with. But finding out that even our beginning wasn't what I thought. I don't know if I can get past that. Please don't leave, Daniel said, and there was desperation in his voice now. Please. I'll answer any question you have. I'll tell you anything you want to know. Just don't walk away. But Lily was already walking toward the bedroom, closing the door behind her, leaving Daniel standing alone in the living room with the weight of his choices finally catching up to him. Lily spent the next 2 days mostly in the bedroom, leaving only for meals she barely ate and showers where she stood under the hot water trying to wash away the feeling of betrayal that clung to her skin. Daniel gave her space, but she could hear him on the phone. His voice tense and low, talking to people about security and contingencies and what to do if she decided to leave. On the 3rd day there was a knock on the bedroom door. Lily opened it expecting Daniel, but instead found a woman she'd never seen before. She was in her 50s, professional-looking, with kind eyes and an air of authority. "Mrs. Zhao," the woman said. "My name is Margaret Chen. I'm with the FBI's Organized Crime Division. May I come in?" Lily's heart started racing. "How did you get in here?" "Your husband let me in," Margaret said. "He's downstairs with my partner. We need to talk to you about an offer we'd like to make." Lily let the woman in, her mind spinning. Margaret sat down in the chair by the window and pulled out a folder. "We've been investigating Daniel Zhao's organization for 3 years," Margaret said. "We know what he's been doing, dismantling his father's criminal empire. And we know you recently learned the truth about his identity and activities." "How do you know that?" Lily asked. "We've had surveillance on several members of the organization," Margaret said carefully, "including some of the people who recently tried to hurt you. We know about the kidnapping, the rescue, all of it. And we'd like to offer you a deal." Lily's hands were shaking. "What kind of deal?" "We need information about Daniel's remaining operations," Margaret said. "Names, locations, financial records. In exchange, we'll offer you full immunity from prosecution and protection if you decide to leave the marriage. We'll help you start over somewhere safe, somewhere far from all of this." Lily stared at the woman, trying to process what she was hearing. "You want me to betray my husband. We want you to help us finish what Daniel started," Margaret corrected. "He's done good work dismantling his father's organization, but there are still dangerous people out there, still illegal operations running. We can shut them down completely, but we need detailed information that only someone inside the organization would have access to." "And if I refuse?" Lily asked. Margaret's expression softened. "Then you go back to living in danger, always looking over your shoulder, always wondering if the next threat will be the one Daniel can't protect you from. Or you could take this opportunity to walk away, to build a new life without all of this hanging over you." The woman stood up and set a business card on the table beside the bed. "Think about it. You have my number. Call me when you're ready to talk." Margaret left, and Lily sat alone in the bedroom holding the business card, her mind racing. This was her way out. A clean break, protection, a new life far from the danger and lies and constant fear. But it would mean betraying Daniel, the man she loved despite everything. The man who'd lied to her but who'd also tried to do the right thing, to dismantle an empire built on pain and suffering. Lily thought about everything that had happened since that phone call had woken her at 2 in the morning. The fear, the lies, the kidnapping, the violence. She thought about the life she'd believed she was building and the reality she'd discovered instead. And she thought about Daniel, standing downstairs with an FBI agent, knowing his wife was being offered a way out and not trying to stop it. That night Lily came downstairs. Daniel was sitting at the dining table, his head in his hands, looking more defeated than she'd ever seen him. When he heard her footsteps, he looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. "What did you tell them?" Lily asked. "I told them I wouldn't blame you if you took their offer," Daniel said quietly. "I told them you deserve a life without all of this. That you deserve better than what I can give you." Lily sat down across from him. "And what do you want?" "I want you to stay," Daniel said, his voice breaking. "But I also want you to be safe and happy. And if staying with me means you'll never have that, then I want you to leave. Even if it destroys me. Lily looked at the man across from her, at the guilt and love and exhaustion written all over his face, and she made a decision. I'm not taking their offer, she said. Daniel's head snapped up. What? I'm not going to betray you, Lily said firmly. But I'm also not going to keep living like this, in constant fear, never knowing who to trust or what's real. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to work with the FBI voluntarily. You're going to give them everything they need to shut down what's left of your father's organization. And then we're going to start over, completely over, with new identities and a new life somewhere far from all of this. Lily. That's the deal, Lily interrupted. We end this together on our terms and then we disappear. Or I take their offer and disappear alone. Your choice. Daniel stared at her for a long moment, and then he nodded slowly. Okay, he said. Okay, we'll do it your way. Over the next 3 months, Daniel worked with the FBI to systematically dismantle what remained of his father's criminal empire. He gave them names, locations, financial records, everything they needed to make arrests and seize assets. Lily watched as the man she'd married transformed from someone living in the shadows to someone actively choosing the light, even knowing it would cost him everything he'd once had. The process was brutal. People Daniel had known his entire life were arrested. Assets worth millions were seized. And through it all, Daniel and Lily stayed together, bound by their choice to end this chapter of their lives completely. When it was finally over, when the last arrest had been made and the last account had been frozen, Margaret Chen came to their apartment one final time. It's done, she said. The organization is finished. You're both free to go. What about protection? Lily asked. What about the people who might still want revenge? We've arranged new identities for both of you, Margaret said, handing them each a folder. New names, new backgrounds, new lives. As far as anyone will know, Daniel Zhao and Lily Chen disappeared. These people don't exist. Lily opened her folder and looked at the documents inside. A new driver's license with a new name. A new social security number. A new birth certificate. A complete erasure of the life she'd known. Where will we go? She asked. Wherever you want, Margaret said. We recommend somewhere small, quiet, far from any major city. Somewhere you can blend in and build a normal life. After Margaret left, Lily and Daniel sat together on their couch, holding their new identities, trying to process what came next. Are you scared? Daniel asked. Terrified, Lily admitted. But also relieved. For the first time since that phone call woke me up, I feel like we might actually have a chance at a normal life. It won't be easy, Daniel said. Starting over, learning to be different people. We'll have to leave everything behind. Friends, family, careers. Everything. I know, Lily said. But we'll have each other. And maybe that's enough. Daniel pulled her close, and they sat there holding each other as the reality of their new future settled around them. It wouldn't be the life Lily had imagined when she'd married Daniel at City Hall 9 months ago. But it would be theirs, built on truth instead of lies, on choice instead of circumstance. 6 weeks later, Lily and Daniel, or rather the people they'd become, moved into a small house in a coastal town 3,000 miles from where they'd started. The town had one main street, a diner that served breakfast all day, and a beach where they could walk for miles without seeing another soul. Lily got a job at a local design studio, using her skills but building a new portfolio under her new name. Daniel started working with a non-profit that helped former criminals reintegrate into society, using his experience to give back in ways he'd never been able to before. They bought groceries at the same store every week. They learned their neighbors' names. They adopted a dog from the local shelter, a scruffy mutt who slept at the foot of their bed and barked at seagulls. It was ordinary, quiet, nothing like the life they'd left behind. And it was exactly what they needed. One evening, about 3 months after they'd moved, Lily and Daniel were sitting on their porch watching the sunset when he said, "Do you ever regret it? Staying with me. Everything you gave up." Lily thought about it for a moment. She thought about her old life, her old friends, The version of herself she'd been before that phone call had changed everything. She thought about Rachel, who she'd never spoken to again. About the career she'd been building. About all the normal, uncomplicated things she'd lost. Sometimes, she admitted. But then I think about what I gained. The truth. Agency. A partner who finally trusts me enough to show me who he really is. That's worth more than anything I left behind. Daniel took her hand, lacing their fingers together. I love you, he said. The real you. Not the version I tried to protect or the version I thought you should be. Just you. I love you too, Lily said. The real you. Even the messy, complicated parts. They sat there as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. And for the first time since their marriage began, Lily felt like they were finally building something that might actually last. But peace, Lily had learned, was fragile. 2 months later, she came home from work to find Daniel standing at the kitchen window. His shoulders tense, his jaw tight. She knew that posture. She'd learned to read the subtle signs of danger over their months together. What is it? She asked, setting down her bag. There's a car that's been parked across the street for the last 3 hours, Daniel said quietly. Same one I saw yesterday near my office. Lily's stomach dropped. You think they found us? I think we need to be careful, Daniel said, turning to face her. It might be nothing, but it might not be. They spent that evening making contingency plans, just like they had in their old life. Escape routes, emergency contacts, safe places to meet if they got separated. All the things they'd hoped they'd never need again. But that night, lying in bed listening to Daniel breathe, Lily realized something important. She wasn't as scared as she'd been the first time her world had fallen apart. Because she knew what she was capable of now. She knew she could survive danger, betrayal, impossible choices. She knew she was stronger than she'd ever imagined. And she knew that whatever came next, they'd face it together. The car disappeared the next day. Daniel's contact at the FBI confirmed it had been a tourist who'd broken down and was waiting for a tow truck. False alarm. But the scare had reminded them both that their past, no matter how far they ran, would always be a shadow they'd have to learn to live with. A year after they'd started their new life, Lily discovered she was pregnant. She'd been feeling off for a few weeks, tired and nauseous in the mornings, before she finally took a test. When she saw the positive result, she'd sat on the bathroom floor for 20 minutes, trying to process what it meant. They'd never talked about having children. The conversation had seemed impossible when their lives were in constant danger, when they didn't know if they'd survive the next threat. But now, in their quiet coastal town with their ordinary lives and their new identities, the possibility had become real. She told Daniel that evening over dinner. She'd cooked his favorite meal, set the table with candles, tried to create a moment worthy of the news. But when it came time to actually say the words, she'd started crying instead. I'm pregnant, she'd said through her tears. And I don't know if we're ready for this, if we can protect a child, if we can give them a normal life when our past might always find us. But I want this. I want us to have this. Daniel had gotten up from his chair and knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. We'll figure it out, he'd said. His voice steady despite the tears in his own eyes. We've survived everything else. We'll survive this too. Together. 9 months later, they welcomed a daughter into the world. They named her Hope, because that's what she represented. Hope for a future that wasn't defined by their past. Hope that they could build something beautiful from the broken pieces they'd been given. Holding his daughter for the first time, Daniel had looked at Lily with an expression she'd never seen before. Pure, uncomplicated joy. Thank you, he'd whispered. For staying. For believing in us. For giving me a reason to be better than I was. Lily had smiled through her exhaustion. We gave each other that, she'd said. That's what makes it real. 2 years after that phone call had woken Lily at 2 a.m. and changed everything. She stood in the kitchen of their small coastal house, watching through the window as Daniel played with their daughter in the backyard. Hope was laughing, chasing bubbles Daniel was blowing. Her small face lit up with pure happiness. Lily thought about the life she'd believed she was building when she'd married Daniel. The safe, uncomplicated partnership she'd imagined. The comfortable future she'd thought they'd share. That life had never existed. It had been a fantasy built on secrets and carefully constructed lies. But this life, messy and complicated and built on truth, was real. It was theirs. And despite everything they'd survived to get here, despite the constant awareness that their past might always lurk in the shadows, Lily wouldn't trade it for anything. Because she'd learned something important through all of this. Love wasn't about safety or certainty or perfect beginnings. It was about choice. The daily choice to stay, to trust, to build something together even when the foundation was cracked. She'd chosen Daniel, knowing everything. And he'd chosen her, trusting her with truth he'd spent his whole life hiding. That was worth more than any fantasy. Daniel looked up and saw her watching. He waved, smiling that smile she'd fallen in love with, the one that was finally completely genuine. Lily waved back, then stepped outside to join her family. Their daughter ran to her, tiny arms wrapping around her legs, and Lily lifted her up, breathing in the scent of sunshine and soap and innocence. Daniel put his arm around them both, and they stood there in their backyard, a family built from impossible circumstances, held together by choices they'd made and continued to make every single day. The future was uncertain. Their past would always be a part of them. But in this moment they had each other. And sometimes that was enough. "I love you," Lily said, looking at Daniel. "I love you too," he replied. "Both of you. More than I ever thought I could love anything." Hope squirmed in Lily's arms, reaching for the bubble wand in her father's hand. They laughed and set her down, letting her chase more bubbles across the grass while the afternoon sun painted everything gold. It wasn't the life Lily had planned, but it was the life she'd chosen. And that made all the difference. If you made it this far, drop a comment and let me know what you thought. Did Daniel deserve a second chance? Could you forgive the lies if the love was real? And if you want to see more stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. There are plenty more complicated, messy, beautiful love stories coming your way. Thanks for watching, and if you loved this story, I'd really love to read your comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.